Hi and welcome to another episode of Delaware County Political News. Meet the experts. Today we are here with Jack Stollsteimer. Jack is the current Deputy Pennsylvania State Treasurer, formerly a federal prosecutor for 5 years, also the Delaware County Assistant DA, and a longtime resident of Haverford Township. He currently chairs the Haverford Township Democratic Committee. Jack, thanks for joining us here today.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks for having me.
What are you working on currently in the Treasurer's office with Joe Torsella?
Well, thank you for letting me talk about Treasury, which is one of the most important offices in Pennsylvania. The State Treasury is a department of about 350 employees. The Treasurer himself, Treasurer Torsella, is the state's fiscal officer. He's the custodian for about $100 billion worth of money that comes into the state coffers every year. He's responsible for investing those monies, and he's also responsible for paying out transactions. Over 25 million transactions a year are done by Treasury employees with all the state's money. That's a lot of responsibility. He also sits on the board, the two state retirement boards for state employees and for public school employees. Thankfully, I have very little to do with the fiscal operations of the Commonwealth. What I do for Treasurer Torsella is I manage our consumer programs, which are very important to the people that we serve. So if I can, Larry, let me talk to you about the programs we have and sort of walk you through what they do.
Certainly. I understand you have two main ones, if I'm not mistaken.
We do. First we have an Unclaimed Property Program, which unclaimed property, for people who aren't familiar with it, is essentially any financial asset that goes missing, unclaimed by its owner for a set period of time, usually 3 years. So it could be the contents of a safety deposit box, it could be a lost security that never got to its owner, or it could be a check that hasn't been deposited. My own wife found out when I became a deputy treasurer that she had $40 that was 30 years old that the Treasury had for her to reunite to her as unclaimed property.
How long does it hold on to lost property?
In perpetuity. The Treasury has over $2.3 billion worth of property that has been reported to us. We are, under the law, the custodian of that property. We are responsible for collecting it from holders of that property, corporations, municipal governments, courts, all of those people who would have those items. We hold them, invest them for the public by putting them into the general fund so we can pay for roads, schools, and bridges while we have the money. And we're also responsible for reuniting them with their owners. Treasurer Torsella was very excited to announce just yesterday that we had set a new record this past year. In the fiscal year that ended on June 30th, we had returned $227 million worth of unclaimed property to Pennsylvania residents. That's the highest mark we've ever been able to return to people.
Total amount?
Total amount, $227 million. Larry, 1 out of 10 Pennsylvanians has unclaimed property. The average claim is about $1,600. And when we can put that money back into the pockets of average citizens, what that does is it just speeds up the economy. That's
Sure.
Money that just is automatically put back into the economy to local shops and to paying your bill. So we're very, very fortunate that we've got a great group of employees in our Bureau of Unclaimed Property who work every day to return property. I would ask you, for anybody who's watching this show, they should look at the Pennsylvania Treasury's website, patreasury.gov. We have a searchable database right under Unclaimed Property. You just click on the icon. You can put your name, your family member's name, you can put a business that you might have owned or been responsible for, or a nonprofit, all of those names, and you will find if we've got unclaimed property for you. If you do, I would encourage you to claim it today. We want to give you back your money. That's our job. That's up to the individual. We'd like to have everybody claim their money, quite frankly. My wife's situation, it was a $44 dividend check that never got to her. I encouraged her, of course, to claim it. But there is some paperwork. We're fiduciaries for that, all the money in the general fund. So we do need to make sure we're returning it to the right people. But most of the claims, people who claim their money, they're relatively simple. It's just printing out a form, giving us a form of ID, sending that form back to us so we can match it up to your property. And again, we returned $227 million worth of property last year. So we're reaching a lot of folks, and we're getting them back their money as quickly as possible.
So you say it's just a form that needs to be filled out. You don't need an attorney to do this?
You don't, and in general, they're straightforward claims. Again, in my wife's case, for an example, it was a dividend check. She just had to prove that she lived at that address when the check went missing. For other claims, it can be more involved. There could be estates, for example, trusts involved in the actual owner of the property, and that can get a little bit more involved. Sometimes it's helpful. Obviously, being attorneys ourselves, we know that there are just times when an attorney can best unravel, because we're talking really about property rights here. But for the average claim, and they're generally small dollar claims, you just call us, send us a claim form, and we'll handle the rest.
Sometimes private companies send us, citizens of the Commonwealth, a letter saying, I found your unclaimed property. I will have this sent to you. Sign here, and I will only charge you 15%. What advice do you have, or can you give advice in that general situation?
Sure. There's a business out there that's related to unclaimed property. They're generally called finders in the lingo of the unclaimed property world. And just to give you a sense of the scale of this, we're talking billions of dollars. Pennsylvania brought in $400 million last year on unclaimed property. We're one of the largest states, but when you add the 50 states up together, you're talking into the billions of dollars every year that goes missing and gets reported to unclaimed property departments and treasuries all across the country. Some people find that service to be of value to them. They may not know about the unclaimed property, they may not want to deal with the paperwork themselves, and they're willing to spend a portion of their money to get that property returned to them. Under Pennsylvania law, if the property is already at the Treasury, if it's been reported to us, those finders have to get a license to operate in Pennsylvania, and they can only charge maximum of 10% a fee. 10% of the property value as a fee. Unfortunately, there are also people who work, there's a time period called the dormancy period, which is, again, usually 3 years for most property types. And during that period of time, there are companies that try to return that money with charges that I would just describe as usury. Oftentimes people get a letter saying, like you described, Larry, except they would say, we found unclaimed property for you, and we're going to charge you 35% of the value of that property we will tell you where it is and do the work to get it for you. Unfortunately, those charges are beyond what we can regulate, but I will tell you, once Treasury has the money, we return the property for free. So if you ever get a letter saying somebody has found your unclaimed property, the first thing you should do is look at your state's Treasury unclaimed property website. If you're a Pennsylvania resident, look at ours. And if we've got it, we will return it to you for absolutely free.
So some advice that you can give with confidence. After you receive the letter, you don't owe that person anything if it's already in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Treasury.
Correct. You can just call our 800 number, which is on the website, or you can just look at the website and claim it through the web. You can do it through the internet. Again, if you claim it directly from Treasury, there's never a fee involved.
What efforts does the Unclaimed Property Department do to find the owners of property?
So what Treasury's responsibility is to take in all new property and to try to let those folks know by sending them notices that we've got their property. So under Pennsylvania law, the company who holds your property is now, for the first time, because Treasury asked for this change to be made to the legislation last year, they're required to do an outreach to the owner of the property before it's reported to us. After it's reported to Treasury, we have the responsibility to try to find those people by sending them a letter saying, hey, we've got your property. We also advertise in your local newspaper and your legal journal in your county, and it's always available on our website. So the initial property, when it's first reported to Treasury, we do a lot to try to return it to those folks. And we're using all of the modern sort of data tools that we can get to find proper addresses, because in most cases the reason it went unclaimed in the first place is because the holder doesn't have a proper address for that person anymore. They've subsequently moved, there may have been a death, all of those kind of things come into play.
You're doing significantly more than last known address.
Absolutely. It's to everybody's benefit for us to more quickly get this property into people's hands, which is also why the dormancy years was reduced a couple years ago, in part because the longer the property goes missing, the harder it is to find folks, right? So the quicker we can get letters out, the quicker we can try to find those people, the better off it is for our ability to return it to the rightful owner.
There's other programs that you're involved with,
Yes.
college savings programs.
Correct.
Tell us about that, please.
Yeah, we're very excited about the savings programs the Treasury has. One is for people who want to save for their child's education. We run, it's called 529, PA 529, but these are two programs, two of the oldest college savings programs in the country. The 529 is the designation under the IRS code, the federal law, that allows this money to accumulate without there being a tax applied to it. So the best way to save for higher education is through a 529 program. Pennsylvanians are sold, two programs are sold directly. One is an investment program, and it's managed, the money is managed by Vanguard, local investment company with very low fees. What happens in that program is you invest your money. You can invest tax-free for up to $14,000 a year, and you get a state tax exemption on your state taxes when you put that money into a 529 program. The IP program, what happens is it's just like any other investment vehicle. The value of the investment over time is based upon the returns of that investment fund. Vanguard has about 14 different levels of funds that you can pick from, and over time, again, it's the time value of money, Larry. The earlier a parent or a loved one, it can be a grandparent, parent, uncle, aunt, doesn't matter, can open an account and name a child as a beneficiary. If they start putting that money in, even small amounts add up over time. It's the time value of that money that's important. And as we all know, the cost of tuition is skyrocketing and has been skyrocketing for the last 30 years. We really want people to know that the best way to save for it is through the 529 programs. The second 529 program we have is in some ways even a better deal. It's called the Guaranteed Savings Program. And what that program, it's very unique. The Pennsylvania program is unlike any other in the country, the GSP program. What the GSP allows you to do is to buy tuition for tomorrow at today's prices. Your return is not directed by the stock market return. It's directed instead by the rate of tuition inflation. So when you put money into a GSP account, you're buying college credits at a college level that you select. Doesn't mean your child ends up having to go to that school or that level of school. You can change and we recalibrate those amounts over time. But when you put money into a GSP account, you're buying a credit at that school. So for example, you're buying a credit at Penn State today. When your child goes to school, let's say 18 years later, Treasury pays the difference in the cost of that credit when he goes to school from when you bought it. And we do that because of the returns we get on the money that we invest for all the account holders.
Aren't you taking away the choice of academic institution from your child if you purchase that second option?
Not at all. What you do, the savings level, there's 5 different levels from community college up through private Ivy League school. What you're doing is you're just giving you a benchmark of what your money is buying at any given time. If your child ends up going to a completely different institution, it doesn't matter. Again, Treasury will just recalibrate that money, but you still get the benefit because we go back in time and we say, okay, your son or daughter didn't go to a state school, but they went to a private institution instead, so now we have the responsibility to buy a credit at that level that you invested in when you first bought that credit. So again, there's no difference to you. You're still benefiting because your child is still going to get a credit. It's just the cost to the program is increased.
And what is the downside of using the second option, why would anyone want to buy the first option rather than the second option when the cost of school, the cost of college tuition is going up so much higher than the stock market?
Well, investors can choose whatever they want to choose. I mean, everybody manages their money differently. Some people are just much more comfortable putting money into a Vanguard account, and especially when the stock market is at a high, as it is now, a lot of people will do that. We find new account holders moving into the investment plan because they see the returns. The GSP is always a good deal. It's just always a good investment.
GSP is which
one? The Guaranteed Savings Program, where you're
Second
buying
one.
tuition for tomorrow at today's prices. That is a flat-out great investment. They're both good investments. It's really just a question of what your flavor is, what your particular idea is, and your willingness to take on stock market risk, as opposed to a more guaranteed investment, which is not driven by the stock market, but driven by the cost of college tuition inflation. College tuition inflation can stop, right? Well, there's a movement to try to get colleges to stop raising prices. Treasurer Torsella just came out last week and strongly criticized the state the state higher education system in Pennsylvania, because we raised the tuition this year for 3.5%, which is higher than the rate of inflation. We have one of the worst levels of student debt in Pennsylvania in the country. We have the third highest level of student debt in the country, in part because our state puts so little money into supporting our institutions of state higher education.
Before Corbett cut
well,
funding, or after?
It's really been this legislature. The budget is really driven in many ways in Pennsylvania by the legislature, who creates the law in negotiation with the governor.
You don't blame the Corbett administration necessarily then?
I think the policymakers in Harrisburg have been very short-sighted when it comes to higher education. I wouldn't want to blame one particular party or one administration. It's been a continuous problem. I will say Governor Wolf has tried repeatedly and is currently trying to raise revenues in Pennsylvania, reoccurring revenues, so that things like higher education will get properly or more properly funded. But there has been very little appetite in the legislature to raise revenue, and that's been the problem for the last few years, last several years.
Jack, you mentioned 2 college savings programs. Is there anything else available for residents of the Commonwealth?
Yes, Larry. In fact, Pennsylvania has now, since April 3rd, we've created a new savings program for people in Pennsylvania with disabilities called ABLE, Achieving a Better Life Experience. This is a very exciting program to help a very, very important group of people in our society. The impetus for the ABLE program is really U.S. Senator Robert Casey. Bob Casey has become the federal advocate for people with disabilities in this country. In 2014, he was able to pass through a piece of legislation at the federal level, creating the ABLE program, allowing states to set up under the IRS code these tax-exempt accounts to allow people with disabilities for the first time to save significant assets without losing their eligibility for federal programs like Medicaid and in particular Social Security disability programs. Previous to Senator Casey and President Obama and Senator Burr, quite honestly, this was a bipartisan effort in the Senate to get this done. But previous to their change in the federal law, if an individual was on Social Security disability but had the ability to work or had the ability to have savings gathered for them, they couldn't have more than $2,000 worth of savings in their own name, or they would lose eligibility to the federal programs. That really put these people at a disadvantage, these people who are trying so hard to be productive citizens in our society. Senator Casey stood up for them. He was very effective. He got the law passed. The president signed it. But it required enabling legislation in Pennsylvania and every state to create the program. Senator Casey's a former state treasurer, so he was very excited to see the Pennsylvania legislature last year create such a program called ABLE in the Treasury Department. So it fits into our suite of consumer savings programs. The program, like I say, allows people with disabilities, if the disability has to be manifested or it has to be effective to the person's life before the age of 26, but they are now able to save up to $100,000 in their own name without losing Social Security disability. And if they're not Social Security eligible, for disability eligible, they can save even more, up to $500,000, $511,000. And that money can be used for all kinds of things. Almost anything that improves their life is a qualified expense under the ABLE program. We've seen tremendous interest in the program already. We've had over 450 people in less than 4 months who have signed up. We've got tens of thousands more who are interested. And we've got over $1 million in assets from those folks depositing their money. And it's not just a savings program, it also has a checking account. So just think of it this way, Larry, and I've seen people talk to Treasurer Torsella about this, people who have physical disabilities but are now able to work but weren't able to put money in their own name before, now can. The empowerment that they feel is extraordinary. They're now financially full U.S. citizens because of the ABLE program. So we're very excited about it. We just need to get the word out about it. It's a new program. It affects, according to Senator Casey, there's about 1.7 million people in Pennsylvania with qualifying disabilities. We now have a mission to try to reach all of them in whatever way we can. It's a financial product, so we also have to be sensitive to their ability to understand what it is. Kind of similar to the investment plan we talked about earlier with our college savings program. It offers different kinds of ways to save. Aggressive growth, moderate growth, all kinds of things. So people have to start becoming a little more financial literate.
Are physicians notified to tell their disabled patients?
The disability community has been waiting desperately for this program, and they're the leading advocates of spreading the message about it. So yes, to answer your question, yes, everybody in the disability community is making sure that doctors and caregivers and everybody in their communities that they work with knows about the program. Treasury is also undertaking, we're partnering with all of those folks and all of those groups to get the message out.